The first additional way to display data is by using cumulative frequencies. These are obtained by adding all the frequencies as you go down your table. So it's also like a running total kind of idea. And so you can have cumulative frequency, where you have your running total of frequencies, and you can have cumulative relative frequency, where you have your running total of relative frequencies. So, did we get that down? So for this example, we have a data set, and I already did the frequency and relative frequency for you. So again, this is saying like the value of 1 happens 4 times, the value of 2 happens 1 time, etc. So for the cumulative frequency, you always start with whatever the first frequency is, just carries over. But then as you go down, you just keep adding frequencies. So our next one, we would add 1, so we'd have 5. Then our next frequency is a 2, so we would add 2. So our next one would be 7. Then we add 2 again, because that's our next frequency. And then we add 1. And so then with cumulative frequencies, this number in the last row of your table should be equal to your population. So however many people or items you have in your population. Okay, so it's just a running total. You just keep adding the frequencies as you go down. And then relative frequencies, same idea, but you're just adding the relative frequencies as you go down. So our first relative frequency is the 0.4, so we carry that over. Then our next relative frequency is 0.1, so we add 0.1. Then our next relative frequency is 0.2, so we add 0.2. In this case, they happen to be the same numbers, like 5 and 0.5. That's just because our total is 10. They won't always be the same. Just worked out nicely for this one. Then we add 0.2 again. And then we add 0.1. And so for cumulative relative frequency, since you're adding up all the frequencies, that number in your bottom row of cumulative relative frequency should be equal to 1, or close to it, depending on how you rounded. So this is a way that you can check both of your cumulative frequency and your cumulative relative frequency. Okay, any questions on that? So it's just a running total. Okay, so then the next thing is a frequency polygon. This is a line graph. A line graph means you connect your points with straight lines. And these points that we use for the frequency polygon, the x value of the point is what's called the class midpoint, which we'll talk about in a minute. That's your x value. And the y value is your frequency, or relative frequency if we're doing a relative frequency polygon. Again, this can be relative frequency too if you want. Just depends on the type of frequency polygon you're doing. Just like we can have frequency histograms and relative frequency histograms, same idea. Just means your y-axis labels will change. Okay, so now how to draw a frequency polygon. First we need to figure out what these class midpoints are. And so to do that, it's the average of two consecutive lower class limits. So you take your first lower class limit plus your second lower class limit, and you divide by 2 because you have two values. That's how you get your midpoints. Once you have the midpoints, then you just plot your frequency and midpoints as a point. So midpoint, frequency, midpoint, frequency, midpoint, frequency. Connect your dots, and then each point gets connected with a straight line. So from point to point is just one straight line, another straight line. So you're not doing a curve, you're not making it nice and smooth, it's just straight lines from point to point. All right, so let's do an example. So here I have I did the classes already and determined the frequency as well. So to find the class midpoint, again, you just take the lower class limits, two consecutive lower class limits, and you find the average, or you find the middle of those 2 points. So you would take 25 plus 35 divided by 2. Which gives us 30. Yeah. Then do the same thing for the next 2, so 35 and 45. Which will give you 40. Then 45 and 55 gives you 50. And now for the last one, we've kind of run out of classes here, but you still need to figure out what the midpoint is for this last interval, this last class. So you can either pretend if you were going to have another class, this one would start at 65, so 55 to 65. Or the class midpoints are always going to be increasing by the same thing every time, just like our class widths are always the same. And so since we're adding by 10 as we go from midpoint to midpoint, our next midpoint would just be 50 plus 10, which is 60. So again, either way, whatever makes the most sense to you. Why did it freeze? Okay, so again, you can either just keep adding whatever the constant is for the midpoints, or just create your imaginary last class over here to get your last lower class limit. So now to do your frequency polygon, we'll have our midpoints as the x-axis. In reality, this label would still have to be whatever units your values are in. Just in this case, we have, so in this case, we're dealing with age. So our midpoint really should say, or our label should be age. I'm just writing midpoint so you remember it's the midpoints that go there. And so we can go up by 10s, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. And it didn't leave you much room there to label your y-axis, so that's my bad. But this would be our frequency. And our highest one is 35.7, so maybe we can go up to 40. So we'll have 20 in the middle. Sorry about the squeeziness. Oh no, it's good on yours. Oh, I just didn't leave myself room. That was rude of me. Okay, so now we just do a point. So our x value again is the midpoint. Our y value is the frequency. So 30 and 28.9. So 30, 28.9. 40, 35.7. 50, 35.1. And 60, 24.7. And then as you go from dot to dot, you just connect them with straight lines. Okay, and then you just connect every dot with straight lines, and that's it. All right, so that's frequency polygon. You just got to find the midpoints, and then your frequency. Cumulative frequency is just a running total, so you just keep adding as you go down. Any questions on either of those? All right, then the self